Good evening. You're on Strat News Global. I'm Nitin Gokhale. And today with me is Jayadeva Ranade, very familiar face both on Strat News Global and BharatShakti.in. Also a China specialist, as all of you know by now. But before we get into a discussion, a couple of updates on the situation on the ground where the disengagement between the Indian and the Chinese forces has begun, and also the official statements issued both by New Delhi and Beijing over the talks that were held between telephonic discussion between National Security Advisor Ajit Doval and China's Foreign Minister and State Councillor Wang Yi over the tension on the line of actual control on Sunday. So first, the updates from the ground, which some of you may have got in the afternoon when I went live at about 2:30 Indian time. The updates are that the main focus of the first phase of de-escalation or disengagement, let me say, are the three points: Patrol Point 14, Patrol Point 15, Patrol Point 17A. They are the first focus. This is in Galwan Valley and the Hot Springs area, as by now almost everyone who's keeping track of the India-China tension knows. The 3-kilometer buffer zone has been created at PP14 because that's the flashpoint that has been the flashpoint since 15 June when the two sides clashed and lost many soldiers. So the buffer zone has been divided equally on either side of the line of actual control at that point. So 1.5 kilometers on the Indian side, 1.5 kilometers on the Chinese side. Tents and troops and vehicles in that vicinity of that 1.5 kilometers on either side have been removed. They have moved back rather in respective areas of jurisdiction. And that's where the de-escalation or disengagement began at PP 14, 15 and 17. At Pangangso, and this is a surprise to me, a slight surprise to me, a marginal reduction in troop level on the Chinese side has happened between Finger 4 and Finger 8, is what sources at various levels are telling me. That in the past 24 hours, some vehicles on the Chinese side and a section of the troops, say at least 60 to 70 troops have gone back or thinned down from that area. But as we have been saying, as we have been cautioning, the disengagement between Finger 4 and Finger 8, or even the complete withdrawal of the Chinese forces, is going to be a long, painful process. It will take time. It may not happen immediately. It may not happen in weeks' time or 2 weeks' time. Maybe it will take months. But that we'll have to wait and watch. What is heartening is that verification is taking place by both sides about the disengagement steps by unmanned aerial vehicles at the moment. Interestingly, the Galwan River is said to be in high spate because of the ice in the higher reaches melting and the water really gushing through the river. Therefore, that has also created its own difficulties there. But the verification by UAVs is happening at the moment. Physical verification is going to take some time, is what we have been told, because the water level in the Galwan River especially is very high. That problem does not exist at Pangangso or the north bank of Pangangso between Finger 4 and Finger 8. But this is something that both sides will now verify. And the Indian side in particular will be very careful. The level of distrust is very high on the ground because of what happened on 15 June. And the Chinese going back on their word given in the earlier two meetings of 6 June and 22nd June. So what was decided on 30th of June between the corps commanders, the third meeting, is now started to get implemented. But as I said, very early days, it cannot be said with certainty that this will be carried through, because one misstep on either side, and especially on the Chinese side, who have been determined, who are the initiators of this tension and conflict, can lead to further complications. But as they say, well begun is half done. Let us hope that this is a first good step. There will be verification, as I said, from both sides. But the most interesting part is that the special representatives on boundary on both sides National Security Advisor Ajit Doval on the Indian side and Foreign Minister and State Councillor Wang Yi on the Chinese side had a longish conversation on Sunday evening, and they have come up with a kind of, let's say, a formula where, of course, one would have expected a common statement from both sides. Why it hasn't happened is anybody's guess, but those who know diplomacy say that there could have been some areas of differences which both sides acknowledged and said, okay, let's issue two separate statements. Now, if you look at the statements, one by one, some common points and some areas of differences, I would say, not disputes, but disagreements. India said earliest complete disengagement necessary. I'm just paraphrasing from the statement issued by the Indian side, where they say the earliest complete disengagement is necessary for return of peace and tranquility on the border. China says in its first paragraph what happened in Galwan Valley very clear. So it doesn't say right at the beginning that disengagement is necessary or expeditious disengagement is necessary, but they talk about Galwan Valley. India says complete the ongoing disengagement expeditiously in the statement, next part of the statement, that the consensus reached between the corps commanders must be implemented expeditiously is what this implies. China, on the other hand, says we will continue to defend territorial sovereignty. And this is something that Chinese have been saying, coupled with their statement earlier, that the complete Galwan Valley is ours. They can go on claiming that. Indian side has stood there, stopped them at certain places, but they are also sticking to their point. Next, India said ensure phased and stepwise de-escalation, which is again a part of the consensus reached between the corps commanders and, of course, also agreed to by the Chinese, although we don't have any common statement from there. But this is what was agreed upon on 30th of June. China says, and this is the point of commonality, constantly we'll strive to improve and strengthen CBMs, confidence building measures in border areas, which is what India said about stepwise de-escalation and ensure phased withdrawal. India further goes on to say that diplomatic and military discussions will continue for further clarity and further resolution of the tension between the two. China says consensus reached at military level should be implemented. Now, a lot of commonality even here. So, therefore, we thought that these updates were necessary before we got into a discussion. And you heard from Mr. Jayadeva Ranade. Again, needs no introduction. China specialist for life, and someone who's got complete insight into the Chinese mind as well as what their moves have been on the border, has been very forthright in expressing his opinion. So welcome, Mr. Ranade, and first up, your reactions to both the statements or the developments of both at the border and then, of course, the statements.
Good evening, Nitin, and thank you for inviting me to your show again. Firstly, I think it's a very tentative baby step that has been taken with these two statements, but a baby step forward, shall I say, if to paint it in a bit of a positive light. Otherwise, we will all sound very pessimistic. Let me make 2-3 quick points. Couple of you have already covered. Firstly, the Indian side described it as frank and in-depth. In diplomatic parlance, that doesn't mean that it was effusive or that there were many commonalities between the two.
Right.
So, this is one cautionary note. The second is in the opening paragraphs, as you mentioned, of the Chinese statement, they took the opportunity to assert and reiterate their sovereignty and territorial claims on Galwan and, of course, by implication, Ladakh.
Right.
The reason it is, they said the incidents that happened in the western sector,
Correct.
and blame on us in that. I think
Yes.
happened in the western part of the border between China and India.
Right.
Galwan Valley is very clear. So, in other words, whatever happened is very clear from their perception. And then China will continue to effectively defend its territorial sovereignty and the border area and peace. In other words, that they are the injured party, that we are the ones who crossed over onto their side and have, raised the temperatures and raised the tensions. So that is their position. So they haven't resiled at all. That is the implication I would draw. Neither, if this is the background, neither in the discussions that we have will I expect to see, really speaking, the PLA pulling back from the areas where they have come. They might, as little concessions, move back in certain places, but I think in places critical for them, they will hang on.
Okay.
So let us wait and see what happens. The third point, of course, is the subsequent paras. There is a lot of similarity, but again, there are no timelines fixed as to when it will happen.
Sure.
And as you said in your comments also, that there was a little sort of commonality on following the directions, etc. But here I want to make one point, that the directions in China, at least, are given by the Chinese president, who is also the chairman of the Central Military Commission and the general secretary of the party.
Right.
And PLA is his instrument, it's the party instrument, and it is his directives that are followed. In India, that is not the case. We have a prime minister, we have a parliament, we have a defense minister, we have the army chief, etc. So there is a bit of a diffusion on the Indian side. Second, in the Chinese side, obviously Xi Jinping has given some strategic direction before we saw such a major movement taking place. A movement started with 1100 kilometers along the line of actual control. And if the recent reports are to be believed, now it stretches all the way up to Arunachal Pradesh. So someone has ordered this. And the basic question that I will pose to you after this, and why I am skeptical, is if they are now planning to really start the process of disengagement or withdrawal, then why did they come in the first place? Why expend so much time, energy, and money to come here? Why call in forces from other places also as reinforcement, which incidentally I believe continues even now?
Right.
And create a new issue of Bhutan and add that in, something they have not done for over 20 years. It is almost blowing hot and cold at the same time. So these are initial comments.
Initial thoughts, yeah. But you also said this before, that maybe they came in, or they planned this entire exercise to test their own soldiers, their own systems, and also test India's speed and response, how speedily India can come. So maybe that's one of the reasons. But let's not get there, because we've spoken about that earlier. Now let's look ahead, and let's realize that what is the cost that China is willing to pay, or wants India to pay, to withdraw and disengage completely. So if you do some peeping into the crystal ball and tell us, what do you think would be the cost that they would want to extract from India?
Well, that brings us to the question of what were their objectives when they did this? Why did they deploy in the numbers that they did and in the places that they did?
Right.
That is the first question. The second is that the focus, from what I gather, seems to have been on Pangongso, that is across Chushul, possibly Debchok, I'm not sure, but there has been activity there. And as you said, DBO. So is it, and it makes sense, is it because of the deployment in Galwan, is it to cut our access to Siachen and DBO?
Okay.
That could have been one objective of the Chinese.
Right.
Maybe because of our quick deployment after the Chinese came, but our quick deployment,
Right.
the military calls mirror deployment,
Yes.
mirror strength. The Chinese have felt somewhat deterred. They may have thought it would be a quick, swift operation, and before we could even react, they would have cut us off in certain places with some minor skirmishes. But that is
Right.
not to be. But now it also opens up the entire area, giving them the option of deciding where to do what. So even if, and here I'm probably jumping ahead of your question, but even if we start seeing disengagement in certain places, I would certainly be very, very vigilant for further Chinese action, because if this assessment is correct, then why should they waste so much time, money, energy, etc.? Then their objective has not been realized. So would wait to come again, maybe within months, maybe within weeks. We don't know. We'll have to wait and see.
Okay, but so that also then begs the question which has been raised at a couple of places, and I've also had this question. Did the pre-planned Galwan operation on 15 June go wrong, horribly wrong for the Chinese? And then they realized that this is not something that they had bargained for. And the Indian Army also, as you mentioned, they sort of reacted swiftly, did the mirror deployment, and also the kind of response, or let's say retaliation, that happened after the pre-planned attack on the Indian soldiers. Would that have played any part in this decision to at least show some signs of disengagement, at least at Galwan and Hot Springs and other places right now?
I'm sure that the speed with which we came and the numbers that we brought up, they may have felt that it will not be a localized kind of situation now. So that is one. The second was the response by our troops, though unarmed, though caught by surprise at Galwan. They did a lot of damage. And here, the shall I say new development is that the Chinese, who never disclose casualties, of course, not that they bother about human life, but they don't disclose casualties. This time, in voices saying that you should disclose it and look at the honor which the Indians have given, and we are not doing anything. So, to the extent that Hu Shun, the editor-in-chief of Global Times, who's quite vociferous and prolific, he said, have been casualties at the right time, people will be informed. So that was a grudging sort of thing that, wait, it's going to come. But there have been others who have been writing, like Lin Min Wang, etc., of the Futan University, who have been saying that we should consider this if they are doing it. So that is a new factor that has come in, maybe a domestic factor that Xi Jinping will have to think of, that in case the conflict expands, then there will be more body bags going home. So that's another factor I think which will come. So I think that these are a combination of factors that may have made them feel that, and the commanders probably advised, look, our planning was something else, but let us pause, let us evaluate how the Indians have reacted, and then come back, if necessary, with a larger force or with greater surprise, and sort the issue out. But I still think that they are looking at this period where we are tackling COVID also at the same time, and they expect that the bigger powers are also tackling as a window of strategic opportunity. And the final point I'd like to make here is the expressions of support by USA, France, and Israel. I think would have also been factored in by them, that these countries have offered to sell defense hardware to us or ship defense hardware to us early.
Right. What about Russia? I mean, in that context, Russia is playing a very, what should I say, not a double game, but something, a very cautious kind of an approach to both of the countries like India and China. What's your assessment on that front?
I think Russia is very deeply or closely linked with the Chinese, particularly in the economic sphere. They're dependent on China's economy for keeping themselves afloat or keeping their economy going. So I
Right.
think a lot of dependence there. They're supplying over $100 billion worth of defense hardware to the Chinese, plus technology. So there is a lot that is happening there, which is why we have not seen the kind of support expressed by Russia as it used to in the past. This time they have not. I am hesitant to say that the Russians will, not support us in the final instance. They
Right.
may figure out a different way of expressing support by trying to tell the Chinese that you calm things down, don't, attack India or something like that, or trying to call us together on the same table for discussions. But
Right.
if you ask me, the Chinese have decided, and that comes through very clearly, that what the Indians think is not something that they're bothered about.
Okay, so let me go for a step further and see. And there have been assessments on this. You have also spoken about it. We have discussed this quite a bit. That the Chinese may have another game plan. That they tested us. They tested their own efficiency and their effectiveness of their troops, and they may come back within 6 months or 1 year with bigger force elsewhere, maybe, and try and catch us with surprise. So, what should India be doing? Verify, verify, verify should be the mantra, or no trust, no trust, no trust. What should it be?
Firstly, Nitin, if you read what I have been writing, then I have mentioned that this is likely to happen. In fact, I remember addressing, I won't mention the details, but a particular conference with some commanders and all, and I had given certain timelines. They were quite surprised. But certainly, as I mentioned slightly earlier in our conversation today, um, even if the Chinese show signs of pulling back or withdrawal, it will be very temporary. And next time they'll come maybe with greater force or with greater surprise to fulfill their objective, whatever it might be.
Right.
But to your question about what we should be doing, I think
Hmm.
one thing we do need to do is have a fresh look. And I'm talking about the armed forces now, have a
Sure.
fresh look at our policy and knowledge on China. I'm not going to long drawn out things about what we should study and all. That's a totally different issue. But
True.
our policy, we should not be in a situation henceforth of reacting to the Chinese, because that leaves us in the unenviable position of having to push them back, which is, like Kargil, it's going to be very expensive in terms of lives, etc.
Sure.
And so I think that is something that our military high command will have to review to avoid a situation as we are today.
Sure.
So I think that is the first thing. Secondly, that would mean the deployment of UAVs, helicopters, and satellites to monitor very closely the Chinese movements.
Right.
Uh, I think that is the prime need. Uh, in some cases, we may have to deploy our people ahead, which
Right.
normally army doesn't. But I would expect, in fact, had these statements not appeared, I was thinking that this will continue probably into the winter. I still
Winter.
suspect that it might go into the winter. One can't be sure. The statement, what is going to happen in the sheer process may take time, but it could go into the winter. But and the Chinese have prepared very good logistics. So I think I remember, in fact, if I may just mention here, I remember some years
Hmm.
ago the Chinese having prepared quarters for additional troops who may be brought in an emergency on the borders,
Right.
and also created adequate storage of dumps and food, etc. So one should expect that that has already been done, and
Hmm.
that would probably accelerate the speed with which they can come and the stealth with which they can come. And so I would agree with you that not only verify, but keep monitoring. And we will need to be much faster. But I would say that our top echelons need to be very vigilant about what the Chinese are doing, and not be sanguine, if I may say, about movements on the Chinese side and assume that they are for some repair works or whatever.
Correct. So I think two takeaways from there, and as we wind up in another couple of minutes, there have been questions asked by a lot of people, which I'm not going to put here, but you've answered most of them. Somebody asked, Saurabh Shringarpure asked whether are we going back to trusting the CCP. I don't think India is doing that. I think everybody is aware that you cannot, and you just mentioned that verify. Yes.
I'd like to comment here when you talked about. It's many of us use the word trust deficit.
Yes.
Henceforth, we should be realistic and call it absent trust.
Absent trust. I think that's the way that we must treat the Chinese, because given the history, we should by now know that you cannot trust them. So therefore, absence of trust is something that we should use regularly. But nevertheless, on a Monday morning or Monday evening rather, good baby steps taken both on the ground and I think politico-military steps have been taken, or diplomatic military steps have been taken to diffuse the current crisis. When it comes back again, what happens, we don't know. But I think the Indian military, as you mentioned, will need to be now not only be more proactive, but also sort of have plans ready for what they call in their own language quid pro quo. Where if the Chinese come in somewhere, then they must go somewhere else and sit there so that some negotiations can take place. Is something, last word to you again, something that must be planned by the military and the decision makers? Is there a time to now look at our border management posture, border management protocols perhaps in doing so? Would you agree on that?
Yes, entirely. In fact, apart from the fact that there are many vulnerabilities that we have as targets for our armed forces on the Chinese side, but we need to capture places, or we need to, as you said, quid pro quo arrangements have to be made. And there are places which we can take, which are of value to the Chinese. And I think we need to start thinking about it. But I do suspect that our armed forces probably already have these things in plan.
That's right. That's good to know. And thank you very much once again. It was good to have you on the program and analyze at least a bit of it on where the talks are headed or where the situation is headed. We'll keep our fingers crossed and maybe come back again in a week's time or 10 days' time and see whether all the promises that have been made, all the discussions and statements that have been made are being carried through. But thank you once again for joining me.
Thank you. Pleasure.